A pleasant afternoon to our valued customers and business partners. Welcome to the Meralco webinar on the impact of the corporate recovery and tax incentives for enterprises or CREATE Act on the value-added tax in Meralco bills. This is a joint webinar for our biz and corporate customers who are subjected to VAT-Zero Rating. I'm Dane Rialuyo, Meralco Relationship Manager of the Corporate Business Group. I have my co-host with me today, Gian of Biz Partners Group.
Thanks, Dane. Good afternoon to everyone present in today's webinar. I am Gian Zapata, Meralco Biz Customer Service Engineer of the Biz Partners Group. We are glad to have you all here today so we can help you answer questions and concerns you may have about our topic, such as what is the CREATE law? What are the changes on the imposition of VAT? And lastly, what are the new requirements needed to be a VAT-Zero certified?
We just have some reminders for our customers joining us today. We would like to inform everyone that this meeting will be recorded for data keeping, data quality assurance, and for learning purposes related to the subject matter. Throughout this webinar, feel free to type your questions and comments in the chat box. We encourage you to identify yourself so we can acknowledge you properly. After a speaker presents, we will then proceed with our Q&A session, wherein we will try our best to answer all of your questions. Please be reminded to avoid posting personal details such as your service ID number, address, mobile number in the chat. And lastly, please ensure that you are streaming this webinar from a comfortable and cool area that has a strong Wi-Fi reception. To ensure that sound and visuals are crisp and clear, if the broadcast is a bit blurry from your end, we hope you can move to a place where the internet connection is stronger.
Thank you, Dane. Moving along with our program, let us all welcome the head of Meralco's Tax Advisory Group, Mr. Nico Miguel Angsico, for the discussion on VAT-Zero Rating. Please be reminded that the presentation should be used only as a reference and cannot be shared or presented publicly.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Let me just get my slides. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Nico Angsico from the Tax Office of Meralco. And this afternoon, we'll be discussing the impact of CREATE, particularly the provisions amending the VAT-Zero Rating, as it would affect the VAT on sales to registered business enterprises. So this is from our perspective, from Meralco's perspective, so meaning these are your purchases. We have a short agenda this afternoon. We'll be discussing the scope and background. So in this part, we will try to isolate which customers are affected and what is the impact of CREATE. And after that, we'll provide a brief background on what happened. Because as you may know, CREATE Act, which is an amendment to our tax code, has been enacted since April 2021. After that, we'll be discussing the conditions for VAT-Zero Rating. This will be based on the CREATE Act, its implementing rules and regulations, and the related BIR issuances. And lastly, we'll discuss the new process and our requirements for us to accord you VAT-Zero Rating. Okay, so let's go first to the first agenda, which is the scope and the background. So what is the scope of VAT-Zero Rating? I mean, the scope of VAT-Zero Rating in our discussion this afternoon. So we are showing here the pre-CREATE and CREATE rules. So these are the customers subject to 0% VAT, among others. So this is not an exclusive list. So we selected here the relevant customers which are subject to VAT-Zero rate. So under pre-CREATE or before CREATE, we have here IPA registered entities. So these IPA registered entities are companies registered with ecozones Sorry, there's feedback. I'll pause for a while. Hello. Can I continue? All right. Sorry for that. Okay, so before create, IPA registered entities or companies which are registered in eco zones, which are registered and located in eco zones or free port zones such as Philippine Economic Zone Authority, SBMA, Clark Development Corporation, to name a few, they are considered foreign territory for VAT purposes, which means that any sale made by a supplier to those entities are considered subject to 0% VAT following the cross-border doctrine because it would qualify as a constructive export of goods or services. So the requirement was just to provide a VAT-Zero Rating certification coming from the Investment Promotion Agency, and such entity will already be accorded VAT-Zero Rating. That's the first type of entity. And then we also have entities which are VAT exempt by virtue of special laws or international agreements such as ADB, World Health Organization, International Rice Research Institute, embassies, and renewable energy developers. So these entities enjoy VAT-Zero Rating in accordance with the special laws or international agreements. So they follow a different set of rules. But with Create, you will see here, number one, the IPA registered entities is further subdivided into domestic market enterprises and registered export enterprises. So for domestic market enterprises, under Create, these are no longer qualified for VAT-Zero Rating on their purchases, on their local purchases. While for registered export enterprises, they are still subject to 0% VAT, but subject to certain conditions. So it's not absolute, the VAT-Zero Rating. So later on, we will tackle those conditions. And as you may see here, under Create, those which are covered by special laws or international agreements are not affected. So they can still enjoy VAT-Zero Rating in accordance with the special law or international agreement granting them tax exemption. So we started with this slide because we want to zero in. We want to zero in on the. We want to provide context in our. We want to provide context for our discussion this afternoon. So we will only be talking about IPA registered entities, particularly domestic market enterprises and registered export enterprises. So the discussion this afternoon would apply to these entities only. So what are registered business enterprises? So RBEs are IPA registered. So these are companies, partnerships, corporations, which are IPA registered. And when we say IPA registered, they are registered with investment promotion agencies such as Board of Investments, Philippine Economic Zone Authority, Bases Conversion and Development Act Authority, Clark Development Corporation, Subic Bay Metropolitan Authority, Tourism, Infrastructure, and Enterprise Zone Authority, FIVIDEC Industrial Authority, Zamboanga City Special Economic Zone Authority, Cagayan Economic Zone Authority, Authority of the Freeport Area of Bataan, Aurora Pacific Economic Zone Authority, Regional Board of Investments, Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, Poro Point Management Corporation, and John Hay Management Corporation. So these are some of the few IPAs, and there may be other IPAs which may be created by law, and this will also be, then they will also follow the set of rules that we will discuss this afternoon. So when we define a registered business enterprise, it excludes service enterprises such as customs brokerage, trucking or forwarding services, janitorial and security services, insurance and banking, consumers co-op, retail, restaurants, and other similar services. So if you imagine in an eco zone or in a free port zone, you would have the entities which are engaged in, for example, manufacturing, assembling, or product or IT services, and you would also sometimes have service enterprises which support these entities inside the zone, such as for example, restaurants, hotels, etc. So under the definition in CREATE, these enterprises are not considered registered business enterprises. And the more important definition under CREATE is the registered export enterprise. A registered export enterprise is again an entity which is IPA registered and is engaged in the export activities, such as manufacturing, assembling, processing, IT services, BPO services, and other services which result in direct exportation, which means that their client is a non-resident, or constructive exportation to another registered export entity, for which their output will form part of the final product of the other REE, or the registered export entity. So this, by definition, is a registered export enterprise. And of course, this will be as to what entities constitute an REE, it will be identified by your respective investment promotion agencies. Okay. So this is the definition of REE. And as we mentioned in the previous slide, only REEs are entitled to 0% VAT subject to certain conditions. As to what constitutes a domestic market enterprise, so if you would recall in our previous slide, if an entity is a domestic market enterprise, its local purchase of goods and services are no longer qualified for VAT-Zero rating. So under CREATE, DMEs are defined in the negative, which means that all the entities which are not considered export enterprises are considered domestic market enterprise. Therefore, they are no longer allowed to invoke VAT-Zero rating on their local purchases. Okay, so we've already defined an RBE, an REE, and a DME. So I hope by now you know what is the categorization of your companies, as the tax implications would follow those categories. As to a brief background, so as we know, the tax code was amended to change the rules on VAT-Zero rating. So this is just a timeline of the relevant tax issuances. So in January 2018, TRAIN, or your Tax Reform for Acceleration and Inclusion Act, was enacted into law. This is a major amendment to the tax code, and this is the first tax reform package by our current administration. So in this TRAIN law, although this might not be the highlight of TRAIN, because as you may know, in TRAIN, the individual income taxes were lowered. One of the changes there on VAT particularly is that it qualified which transactions are VAT-Zero rated. In TRAIN law, our legislators tried to add a provision saying that sales to entities which are located in separate customs territory and inside a tourism ecozone is considered subject to 0% VAT. But that added provision was vetoed by the president via its presidential veto. And the explanation there says that the VAT-Zero rating is only intended for direct exporters. Of course, as you may know, even before TRAIN, IPA registered entities were already accorded VAT-Zero rating on their local purchases because, again, we are following the cross-border doctrine. Since these entities are considered located in foreign soil, at least for tax purposes, any sale to these entities or their purchases are considered constructive exports. So that is the basis. And even with the changes in TRAIN, that is why it's somehow status quo in terms of sales to IPA registered entities. But come April 2021, CREATE, or the second package of the tax reform, was enacted. And in this CREATE law, sales to registered business enterprises may be subject to 0% VAT, subject to conditions. So what is this condition? Under CREATE, it says there that it will be entitled to 0% VAT provided that the purchase is directly and exclusively used in the registered project or activity of the IPA registered entity. So come June 2021, of course, since we have a law, CREATE, there needs to be an implementing rules and regulations. So the CREATE IRR was issued, and it clarified that only REEs, which is a narrower definition as compared to RBEs, may be subject to 0% VAT, subject to additional conditions. So this is the DOF's take on the CREATE. And the BIR, also in June 2021, issued Revenue Regulations number 9-2021 and its related tax advisory, which I would say somehow a departure from the provision CREATE, because under these revenue regulations, the BIR no longer allows suppliers of registered business enterprises to apply for VAT-Zero Rating on its sales. Therefore, sales to RBEs were considered subject to 12% VAT. Of course, the IPAs and the IPA registrants lobbied against this, and somehow they're successful because in July 2021, the BIR issued RR number 15-2021, which suspends and defers RR number 9-2021 until the issuance of an amendatory RR. So from this period until December, somehow the position on the VAT treatment for sales to RBEs is somewhat in a limbo. It is unclear. Come December 2021, the BIR issued Revenue Regulations number 21-2021, and the DOF amended the implementing rules and regulations of CREATE. And it posited that sales to REEs may be subject to 0% VAT, but again, there were additional conditions imposed. And later on, we will get to these conditions. We will tackle it one by one. And finally, last March 2022, RMC 24-2022 was issued. It clarified issues on the applicable VAT rules, the effectivity dates, the transitory provisions, and the additional requirement for sellers to apply for VAT-Zero Rating before according its customers 0% VAT. So these are some of the relevant tax issuances. As you may know, in April 2022, there is also an issuance requiring a VAT certification template to be issued by IPA. So I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll show it to you later. So this is the background of this is where we stand right now. And we can now move on to the conditions for VAT-Zero Rating. So considering the provisions of the CREATE IRR, Revenue Regulations number 21-2021, and RMC 24-2022, here are the conditions to qualify for VAT-Zero Rating. Of course, this is somehow a simplified version of it. So the first condition is that the customer must be a registered export enterprise. So in the previous slide, we have identified, or we have provided the definition of a registered export enterprise. And then the second condition is that the REE, the VAT-Zero Rating, must be provided within the sunset provisions. So unlike before, wherein an IPA registered entity may be accorded VAT-Zero Rating on its local purchases without a sunset provision, meaning it's perpetual, with CREATE and the relevant BIR issuances, it clarified there that there are certain sunset provisions that need to be observed for an entity to accord IPA registrants VAT-Zero rating. And the third condition is that the purchase of the REE, of the registered export enterprise, must be directly and exclusively used in the registered project or activity to qualify for VAT-Zero rating. And lastly, the VAT-Zero rating must be endorsed by the IPA and approved by the BIR. So these are the 4 conditions we identified in these issuances, and we will tackle it one by one. So jumping to the second condition, considering that we have already defined what is a registered export enterprise, we'll go ahead and discuss the sunset provisions for VAT-Zero rating. So under Create, the sunset provisions for VAT-Zero rating, for you to apply it, you would need to identify, is the activity a newly registered activity, meaning it is registered during the time of Create, or is it an existing registered activity? So if it is a newly registered activity, registered during Create, the entitlement to VAT-Zero rating on local purchases is pegged at a maximum of 17 years from registration. On the other hand, if it's an existing registered activity, the expiration of the entitlement to VAT-Zero rating would be coterminous with the transition period. So what is this transition period? So if the pre-create incentive is ITH only, so let's say the entity was given income tax holiday, let's say on March 2018, it is only entitled to VAT-Zero rating on its local purchases until the expiration of the income tax holiday. So let's say it's accorded income tax holiday of 4 years, which means that the VAT-Zero rating on the entity's purchases would run until March 2022 only. After that, it is no longer entitled to VAT-Zero rating on purchases. If the incentive granted to the activity or to the project is income tax holiday and 5% GIT after the income tax holiday, so GIT stands for gross income tax, or if the project is entitled to 5% gross income tax entirely, the transition period is 10 years from the effectivity of CREATE. So as you may know, CREATE was effective last April 11, 2021. So 10 years from April 2021 would be the entitlement period to VAT-Zero rating for these types of projects. So this is the this is the second condition to be accorded VAT-Zero rating. And the more important condition is that the purchase must be directly and exclusively used in the registered project or activity. So what is meant by direct and exclusive use? So under the Create IRR, it means raw materials, inventories, supplies, equipment, goods, packaging materials, services, including provision of basic infrastructure, utilities, and maintenance, repair, and overhaul of equipment and other expenditures directly attributable to the registered project, without which the registered project or activity cannot be carried out. So that's the definition in the Create IRR. So it must be directly attributable to the project, and without which it cannot be carried out. The project cannot be carried out. So it's somehow difficult to apply, but with the help of Revenue Memorandum Circular number 24-22, the BIR somehow provided clarity on how to apply this direct and exclusive use definition. So only the portion of the expense which is directly and exclusively used by the REE for its registered project or activity can qualify for VAT-Zero rating. So it excludes those purchases which are considered for admin purposes. So the REE concerned should adopt a method to best allocate the goods or services. So in our case, we're providing electricity. So the REE can use separate power meters for its registered project or activity, or it can adopt any method that it may determine the allocation, such as, so this is directly lifted from the RMC, area usage or ratio of utility expenses between COS or cost of sales and admin expenses as reflected in the prior AFS, the audited financial statements. So these are some of the proposed allocation methods by the BIR. There's also a note in the RMC saying that if goods and services are used in both registered project or activity and for admin purposes, and the proper allocation could not be determined, the purchase shall be subject to 12% VAT. So by default, the purchase is subject to 12% VAT unless the REE can provide a reasonable basis for the allocation. And lastly, services for admin purposes, such as legal, accounting, and such other similar services, are not considered expenses directly and exclusively used in the registered project or activity. Okay, so this is the definition of direct and exclusive use. I guess the message of this slide is that somehow the REE is given the liberty to identify the allocation basis it would want to use on its purchases for it to determine which portion is subject to 12% VAT and which portion is subject to 0% VAT. So of course, it follows that it will only be subject to 0% VAT if it's directly and exclusively used in the registered project or activity. Okay. So I hope this provides clarity on the third condition, that the purchased good or service must be directly and exclusively used in the project or activity. Now let's move on to the last requirement. So the requirement is that for the seller to accord VAT-Zero rating, it must seek approval, prior approval from the BIR. So we can make reference to RMC number 24-2022. So one of the questions there says that, is prior approval from BIR needed by the local supplier of goods or services for sales to be accorded VAT-Zero rating under CREATE? So what are the requirements? So the BIR responded saying that this is a requirement. So the seller should apply for VAT-Zero rating. And for it to apply for VAT-Zero rating, the application should include the following: the REE's BIR certificate of registration, the investment promotion agency certificate of registration issued to the REE, and the VAT certification from the IPA. So these are three documents that should come from the REE. And then apart from these, there is a need to prepare a sworn affidavit executed by the REE that goods or services are directly and exclusively used in the production of goods and completion of services to be exported. And for utilities and similar costs, the percentage of allocation to which direct and exclusively used pertains to must be indicated in such sworn affidavit. And lastly, other documents to prove existence and legitimacy of the transactions, such as billings, certified true copies of billings, purchase orders, job orders, service agreements, sales invoice, and or ORs. So these requirements are all required to be submitted to the supplier for the supplier to accord VAT-Zero rating. For the supplier to apply for VAT-Zero rating with the BIR, and after which it will be approved by the BIR or decided whether VAT-Zero rating can be accorded to such customer. So in terms of processing the applications for VAT-Zero rating, in RMC 24-22, it referred to Revenue Memorandum Order 7-2006. And here are the relevant points under the RMO. The seller must lodge the application with the BIR. So the application for VAT-Zero rating, in our case, Meralco will be the one who will lodge the application with the BIR. And if you will read RMO 7-06, it says there that the processing time is 15 working days. But based on our informal inquiry with the BIR, the processing time is usually 5 to 6 days. So again, we are not aware on how consistent this is, but we are just presenting to you what we have read in the RMO and what we have inquired with the BIR. And so you may be asking, when is the effectivity date? So the effectivity date, assuming the BIR approves the application for VAT-Zero Rating, would retroact from the time it is submitted to the BIR. The application is submitted to the BIR until December 31. So in the third box, you will see approval takes effect on the date of receipt of the application until December 31. And you may ask, is it a yearly thing or is it a one-time thing? Based on RMO 7-06, it needs to be renewed every year. So the renewal of application shall be done on or before the last day of each year. So before December 31 of each year. So again, these are some of the relevant points in processing the application for VAT-Zero Rating. So again, Meralco will be the one to process the application for VAT-Zero Rating because prior approval is required to accord VAT-Zero Rating, but all the documents would be coming from the customer or from the registered export enterprise. So those are the 4 conditions for VAT-Zero Rating. So again, the customer must be a registered export enterprise. The entitlement must be within the sunset provisions. The purchase must be directly and exclusively used in the registered project or activity. And lastly, the zero rating must be endorsed by the investment promotion agency and approved by the BIR through this application for VAT-Zero Rating process. Okay, so now that we have laid down the rules under the law and its related regulations, what is now the new process and what are the requirements? Okay, so let's go first to the list of documents required from the customers. So number 1, we would be needing the BIR certificate of registration. So again, this is not vendor specific. We understand that you as registered companies, you would have this BIR certificate of registration on hand. The next document would be the IPA certificate of registration. Again, this is somehow a permanent file. We understand that this is readily available and can be provided by the registered export enterprises. So this is the certificate of registration issued by the investment promotion agency. And the third document would be the VAT certification or the VAT-Zero Rating certificate. Sorry, the VAT certification provided by the investment promotions agency. So then in RMC number 36-2022, which was issued last April 6, 2022, it provided a template for this IPA VAT certification. So let me show you this template. So in RMC 36-2022, there are two templates. So one template for new activities, meaning activities registered during create, and one template for existing activities, meaning activities which were registered with an IPA prior to create. So let's delve deeper. So this is the template to be issued by the IPA. Okay, so it just says here that that the entity is registered with a specific IPA and that it is a registered export enterprise. Okay, so it says here that this is to further certify that the company is a qualified export enterprise for purposes of VAT-Zero Rating of its transactions with its local suppliers of goods and services directly and exclusively used in the registered export project or activity in accordance with these regulations. So this certification is issued upon request of the company for whatever legal purpose it may serve and is valid for the year. So I suppose this would be an annual certification since the validity would be for a specific year. So this will be certified by the IPA. So this is the first page. The second page would be an annex detailing the specifics of the registered activity. So it will enumerate the registered activities, the tax incentives entitlement, so whether it's entitled to income tax holiday, special corporate income tax, duty exemption, VAT exemption, and zero rating, and the corresponding validity period. Okay, so this is the VAT-Zero Rating certificate to be issued by the IPA. It's a template required by the BIR. This is for new activities. For existing activities, it is actually the same, exactly the same. It's just that the create certificate number is no longer indicated because, of course, the registration certificate number does not refer to create because it was granted prior to create. So it's exactly the same. So this will be the VAT certificates which we will be requiring. Okay. So going back, so that's the third document, and then so again, this IPA VAT certificate is not vendor specific, meaning once you secure this from your IPAs, you can provide it to your vendors for them to use in the application for VAT-Zero Rating. And the fourth document is a sworn affidavit executed by the registered export enterprise. And we took the liberty of drafting a template. So we'll show you the template. So again, this is not required. You can use your own sworn affidavit. But in case you want to see a sample or you want to use our template, you may do so. So in this sworn affidavit, it will just say that the company is registered with a specific IPA with registration number and the date of issuance, and is considered an export enterprise engaged in specific activities. That the provision of energy by Meralco is directly and exclusively used in the registered project or activity. And the third one, I think, is very important, is the basis of allocation and the percentage. Of course, as the IPA registrant, you would know the proper allocation base to use, and you would know which portion is considered directly and exclusively used in the registered project or activity. So in this case, you would have to indicate your basis of allocation and the percentage, because this will be used by Meralco in billing you, in billing the percentage of the bill, in identifying what percentage of the bill is subject to 0% VAT. And lastly, just to be consistent with the definition in the Create IRR, you would also need to certify that without the provision of energy by Meralco, the registered activity of the company cannot be carried out. So this is just a sample sworn affidavit. There is no required format given by the BIR. Okay, so that is the fourth document. And lastly, documents to prove existence or legitimacy, such as your Meralco bills, ORs, service agreement, etc. So it must be certified. It must be a certified copy as provided in the RMC. So these are the 5 documents. Now we move on to the process. So process for invoking VAT-Zero Rating. So this is just a comparison of the existing and new process. So previously, the customer submits the IPA VAT-Zero Rating certification, and Meralco already tags the service as VAT-Zero rated. Meralco then applies 0% VAT on the bills. In the new proposed process, the customer submits the complete documentary requirements, so the 5 documents in the previous slide. Meralco submits the documents and applies for VAT-Zero Rating with the BIR. So after checking the documents, we will lodge an application for VAT-Zero Rating with the BIR. So upon approval, Meralco tags the service. Upon receiving the approval of the BIR, Meralco tags the service as VAT-Zero rated. And Meralco applies 0% VAT on the bills based on the allocation in the sworn affidavit. That's assuming that it's approved by the BIR. So this is a comparison of the existing and new process. So how do you get started? Where do you submit the documents? So this is the document submission channels that we have right now. So this applies to biz and corporate customers. So the soft copies must be submitted on or before May 31, 2022. Okay. So it can be sent via email to the vat0rating@meralco.com.ph. So we would want to get advanced copies of these documents so that we can already check the completeness of the documents before lodging an application with the BIR. Of course, you may ask, would the soft copies suffice? Well, if you think about it, the sworn affidavit, of course, must be an original copy, and since the requirement for the other supporting documents, such as the billing statement, must be certified as a true copy by the REE, so those need to be provided to us in hard copies. But again, we would appreciate receiving the soft copies ahead of time so that we can review as well. So the hard copies must be submitted on or before May 31. It must be sent to Biz Partners Group, 10th floor Lopez Building, Meralco Center, Ortigas Ave, Pasig City for Biz customers. For corporate customers, Corporate Business Group, 10th floor Lopez Building, Meralco Center, Ortigas Ave, Pasig City. Of course, for inquiries on the submission and follow-ups, you may reach us at the hotline 16210, the email biz@meralco.com.ph, and biz partner manager for biz customers, and for corporate customers, your respective relationship managers. Okay, so the target for filing of application for VAT-Zero Rating is on June 2022. So again, these are the requirements of Meralco. As I understand, some customers might have Reses as its suppliers, so they would need to follow the requirements of their respective suppliers. But again, this is for Meralco. Okay, so I guess this is my last slide. I will be turning over the virtual floor to Gian to continue the program. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sir Nico. At this point, we'll now proceed with the Q&A portion. Allow me to call our panelists. We have our speaker, Mr. Nico Angsico, Mr. Jerry Espirijon, the head of Meralco's Tax, Realty, and Contract Management, Ms. Bernice Garcia Rama, the head of Corporate Partners Private Sector Relationship Management Group, Mr. Marvin Hovero, the head of Corporate Partners Public Sector Relationship Management Group, Mr. Jeron Asherto, Officer of Biz Partners Group Southern Provincial Zone, and Mr. Michael Antonio, Head of Biz Partners Group South Area.
Again, feel free to type your questions and/or comments in the chat box. We encourage you to identify yourself so we can acknowledge you properly. So let's now address the comments and questions of our viewers. For the first question from Ariane Bata, could we avail the zero VAT if we, as a DME, has a tenant classified as REE and they are occupying the whole warehouse? Let me repeat the question. Could we avail the zero VAT if we, as a DME, has a tenant classified as REE and they are occupying the whole warehouse? May I ask Sir Jerry to answer this question?
Good afternoon, everyone. For that specific case, I think that has to be clarified yet by the BIR, because there is no specific rule with respect to an RE who is a lessee. although in our case in Meralco, I understand the registered customer is the lessor, the facilities owner, right? Now, because under the rules on the withholding tax, there is an existing rule from the BIR that allows the tenant or the lessee to withhold on their expenses, although the service is not in their name. Uh, that has to be. We have to clarify if the same rule will apply with respect to VAT-Zero Rating. Once we have an opportunity, we can probably initiate or raise that question with the BIR. Does that answer it? Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Jerry. And then for our next question from Omar Justin Ariete. The question reads, how about diplomatic institutions like embassies, which have been existing in the country for almost 60 years? We only have BIR exemption. Again, the question, how about diplomatic institutions like embassies, which have been existing in the country for almost 60 years? We only have BIR exemptions. Any of the panelists can answer the question.
Okay. So for embassies, they are covered by international agreements. So again, if you would recall in my presentation, we've clarified that these are not affected by the changes under CREATE. So they would still follow the special law or the international agreement granting them VAT-Zero rating. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Nico. So I guess let's proceed to the third question. The third question is from Mary Joy Silang. Are there customers who have already submitted the requirements to BIR for approval? So anyone from the panelists can answer this question.
Yeah, so we've heard that there were already applications for VAT-Zero rating, and there were applications which were denied. For example, for applications made for entities which are considered DMEs, so they were denied by the BIR. So to answer the question, there's already applications which were made.
Okay, thank you, Sir Nico. And then for our next question. Okay, for our next question from Alex Pato. There are PEZA's registered entities as facilities enterprise, and incentives granted to these entities will be subject to the sunset provision. As facilities enterprise, these entities provide lease of premises to other PEZA registered entities, wherein provision for electricity is included. Is the electricity consumption of these facilities entities will be VAT-Zero rated? Again, for our question, there are PEZA registered entities as facilities enterprise, and incentives granted to these entities will be subject to the sunset provision. As facilities enterprise, these entities provide lease of premises to other PEZA registered entities, wherein provision for electricity is included. Is the electricity consumption of these facilities entities will be VAT-Zero rated? Again, anyone from our panelists can answer the question.
So if you would follow the definition of DMEs and REEs, this type of entity would qualify as a DME, in which case it is no longer entitled to VAT-Zero rating on its purchases. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Sir Nico. For our next question, this is from Mart Aureliano. What would Meralco do for the billings from July 2021 to current month where no VAT was charged? May I repeat the question? What would Meralco do for the billings from July 2021 to current month where no VAT were charged? Anyone from the panelists may answer. Thank you. Sorry, Sir Jerry. I think you're on mute. Kindly unmute your your mic.
Okay. So the question is what will happen to billing from
From July
July?
2021 to current month, where no VAT was charged.
Where there were some clarifications made from July 2021 or affecting July 2021 up to December 21. So it has attained a status quo, right? Like, it has
Yeah.
attained status quo. So, and then, so after December 2021, that's where the effect of create would take effect. So, so
Yeah.
we're looking at now at the for billing starting January 2022.
Yeah, maybe
So
just
there are,
to
yeah, Nico, please.
just would want to add that this is actually covered in the RMC. You look at RMC 24-2022, you can invoke the non-retroactivity rule for periods wherein somewhat the issuances is still in a limbo.
Yeah, there were confusions, remember, during those times, July 2021 up until December 2021, and this was clarified by the BR in the RMC. You can refer to the RMC. As Nico said, there is the entities may invoke the non-retroactivity rule. So we're just looking at January 2020, especially for DMEs. So because DMEs are no longer entitled to VAT-Zero Rating. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Nico and Sir Jerry. And for our next question from Maria Cristina Acosta. For enterprises with IPA certificate prior RMC 36-2022, the original IPA certificate issued beginning of the year is acceptable, right? Again, the question, for enterprises with IPA certificate prior RMC 36-2022, the original IPA certificate issued beginning of the year is acceptable, right? Again, our panelists may answer the question, please.
Because of the BIR has issued the templates, it is implied that they would require that the IPA certification follow the template. But of course, we can probably again clarify with the BIR because understandably the IPA has issued certifications prior to the RMC issued by the BIR presenting or requiring the templates to be used.
Thank you, Sir Jerry. For our next question, this is from Juvelin Belino. If our company has allocation ratio to get admin and production percentage, but it changes every month, are we going to submit the allocation ratio to Meralco every month too before we generate our billing? I'll repeat the question. If our company has allocation ratio to get admin and production percentage, but it changes every month, are we going to submit the allocation ratio to Meralco every month too before you generate our billing? Sir Jerry or Sir Nico, kindly answer the question. Thank you.
So again, the premise is that before we accord VAT-Zero Rating, it must be approved by the BIR. So I suppose you can provide allocation ratios as frequent as you like, but you would have to consider that it would have to go through the process of having it would need to be approved by the BIR. So I'm not sure if it is practical to change the allocation on a very frequent basis.
So remember, if there will be a gap between the prior, let's say you already have an approved application, and then we will file another application because of the change in the allocation, that there could be a gap, and the 12% VAT may be implemented or should be applied. So you don't want that. So probably you can come up with an allocation that could represent your for the whole year, or from probably this June up to December of this year.
Okay, thank you, Sir Nico and Sir Jerry, for the clarification to the question. And then for our next question, again, for a lot of our attendees this afternoon asking, will you email us the templates you shared for our reference? I guess, Sir Nico, can you please answer this question?
Yes, we can provide the copy of the deck, but again, it's meant for reference only and not to be presented publicly.
Thank you, Sir Nico. So for our next question from Marjorie Bautista. We are a BOI registered as 100% export company. In our current method in distributing, the electric expense is based on the land area, 70% in production and 30% in admin. Is this enough, or we can use this percentage to determine the allocation of the electricity used? I'll repeat the question. We are a BOI registered as 100% export company. In our current method in distributing, the electric expense is based on the land area, 70% in production and 30% in admin. Is this enough, or we can use this percentage to determine the allocation of the electricity used? Sir Jerry or Sir Nico?
But if in your judgment that's the best or the reasonable allocation method that you can present, no? Yeah, but of course, because you're in the best position to determine the allocation on the following your operations. So if you think that's the best or reasonable, you can apply use that for the application.
Okay, thank you, Sir Jerry. And then for our next question from Alex Patok, is application for a separate power meter, manufacturing and admin possible under Meralco guidelines? Again, the question is application for a separate power meter, say for example, for manufacturing and admin possible under Meralco guidelines? Anyone from our panelists can answer the question.
I'll take the question. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. For the question, the answer is under the existing building code, only one service or electric meter can be provided to a warehouse. For this example, the manufacturing and admin.
Thank you, Sir Mike. So for our next question, this is from Marjorie Bautista. What if we fail to submit soft copies and hard copies on May 31, 2022? Again, what if we fail to submit soft copies and hard copies on May 31, 2022? May I ask Sir Nico or Sir Jerry, please?
Okay. We aim, or as much as possible, we would want to file the application as early as possible, because as mentioned during the presentation by Nico, the effectivity of the VAT-Zero rating would be based on the application date, assuming the application is approved by the BIR. So we would want we could, as early as possible, we can file the application. Now, for those who, of course, we expect our customers to be submitting the requirements. I would believe that after this webinar, you will start gathering your requirements and submit it to Meralco. So once we have sizable number, on our hands, and these are, we think, are complete documents, we will file the application with the BI even before May 31. Of course, because we would want to have a clear cutoff for our customers who will be availing of the VAT-Zero rating. Now, unfortunately, for those who will not be able to submit on or before May 31, we will submit it as soon as we accept or we have the document. So meaning, your VAT-Zero rating will only be applied on the date of that application, probably first week of June, second week of June. It depends. So what will happen now? Then you will be subject, your billing will be subject to 12% VAT until we have the BIR approval.
Okay, thank you, Sir Jerry,
Thank you.
for answering the question. And then for our next question, from Maria Cristina Acosta, the question is, will Meralco reach out to their customers, REE, to submit the soft copies on or before May 31? Or the customers need to submit the documents without any email request from Meralco? Again, the question reads, will Meralco reach out to their customers, REE, to submit the soft copies on or before May 31? Or the customers need to submit the documents without any email request from Meralco?
Yes, we will be sending notices accordingly to all customers, to all REE especially.
Thank you, Sir Jerry. So for the next question, will you be suspending the VAT-Zero rating of your customers pending submission of documents or application, or for those that submit beyond May 31, 2022? I'll repeat the question. Will you be suspending the VAT-Zero rating of your customers pending submission of documents or application, or for those that submit beyond May 31, 2022?
Oh, well, if you recall under the presentation, now there is a reckoning date, specific reckoning date for the VAT-Zero rating, which is the date of application, assuming the BIR has approved the application. So we don't have that leeway anymore of suspending the implementation or carrying on the VAT-Zero rating even without the approval. Because now we need the approval. Unlike before, now we don't have to get the approval of the BIR. So, well, unfortunately, we cannot do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sir Jerry. And then for our next question from Vivian Rodriguez, we requested for the VAT certificate from PEZA, but according to IMD, the certificate issued prior to RMC 36-2022 is still valid and no need to request for a new certificate. Will you still accept the old VAT-Zero rating certificate? I'll read again the question. We requested for the VAT certificate from PEZA, but according to IMD, the certificate issued prior to RMC 36-2022 is still valid and no need to request for a new certificate. Will you still accept the old VAT-Zero rating certificate?
Okay, I think that's a question similar to that was asked before. Okay, if you're saying that if PEZA is saying that it's still valid, okay, we will accept the old certification, the certification prior to the RMC of the BIR with the template with the template certification. But of course, it will depend on the BIR when they process the application if they will require the certification following the template. Okay. So again, okay, we will accept the copies of your certification issued by your IPA, but then when we file that with the BIR, it will depend on whether the BIR will accept that or not. So right now we were not aware of such BIR position if they will accept those old certificates, no? Because as implied in the issuance, they issue the template. So I guess they would want the template to be followed for ease of processing, maybe. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Jerry. For our next question, how do we know if we are approved or denied in zero VAT? This is from Ms. Rochelle Romilia. So again, the question is, how do we know if we are approved or denied in zero VAT?
Once we hear from the BIR on their decision on whether the application is approved or denied, we will notify you.
All right, thank you, Sir Nico. So for our next question from Hannah. Good afternoon. Since Meralco is the one who will submit the requirements for the VAT-Zero rating, will Meralco also validate the ratio declared by the corporation? Or is there any authenticating or validation needed to be secured by us for sharing of admin and manufacturing? Again, I'll read the question from Hannah. Good afternoon. Since Meralco is the one who will submit the requirements for the VAT-Zero rating, will Meralco also validate the ratio declared by the corporation? Or is there any authentication or validation needed to be secured by us for the sharing of admin and manufacturing?
No, we will not be validating because, as I've said, you're in the best position to determine the allocation following your business operations. We may not be able, we may not have the competence to validate the different allocation basis that the customers will provide. So that's that is actually your representation, which we will be filing with the BIR. So the BIR may validate the allocation method but we will inform you if there's any question that may be raised by the BIR with your application.
Thank you, Sir Jerry. So for our next question from Myra Maninas. Is the BIR registration the same with BIR 2303? I'll repeat the question. Is the BIR registration the same with BIR 23003?
Yes, they're one and the same. 2303 is the certificate of registration.
Okay, I hope that clarifies the question. Thank you, Sir Jerry. And then for our next question from Vince. Do we need to reapply again if we are already previously tagged as zero rated? Again, the question is, do we need to reapply again if we are already previously tagged as zero rated?
So again, this is also a new development for us. The RMC just came out in March. So to answer simply is that yes, the application for VAT-Zero rating would need to be complied with.
Thank you, Nico. So again, if you have any more questions or comments, please type them in the chat.
So we are glad that this webinar has answered or has clarified a lot of concerns with this new rule that we are with this new rule that we are discussing. And then for our next question, once again, We have another question. Would it be best if the customers will file with the BIR rather than Meralco? Again, the question from Gerard Pulido. Would it be best if the customers will file with the BIR rather than Meralco?
Based on the RMO 7-2006, it's the seller of the goods or services who is directed to file an application. Because as you know, the VAT is really is imposed on the sale or on the seller. So for purposes of the application for VAT-Zero Rating, is the seller who will file or who is required to file. But there, well, that I have not seen a case where it's the purchaser who files the application.
Thank you, Sir Jerry. We have another question from Rebecca. So as of now, we are on the process of transfer of service. Should we submit the documents before May 31? Let me repeat the question. As of now, we are on process of transfer of service. Should we submit the documents before May 31? May I ask Mr. Marvin Javero or Mr. Mike Antonio to answer the question, please?
Thank you, Dane. Actually, they can coincide with the effectivity of the contract on the transfer of service. Because their billing would start once the contract has been signed. So it would coincide with the zero VAT rating requirements. Thank you.
Thank you
Sir
very
Marvin.
much.
Again, Dane.
Thank you, Sir Marvin. All right, I guess there are no further questions. Oh, there's one more question. Sorry, hold on for a few seconds. All right, this is from Jacqueline Bergancha. Okay. For RES, VAT from Meralco is a pass-through VAT. Who will comply with the requirements, the RES or the CCs? What is the treatment of Meralco to RES and CCs under it? Let me repeat the question. For RES, RES, VAT from Meralco is a pass-through VAT. Who will comply with the requirements, the RES or the CCs or contestable customers? What is the treatment of Meralco to RES and CCs under it? So I hope Sir Jerry or Sir Nico can answer the question, please. Or Sir Marvin?
Actually, the customer should be coordinating with their RES because the requirements that they need to comply, it will be submitted to their RES.
Yes, and since the rest is the supplier or the seller of the service, the rest should be applying for the contestables.
Thank you, Sir Jerry and Sir Marvin. Yes, we have another question in. For the next question from Maria Christian Villanueva. Just to clarify, the customer accounts will be subject to 12% VAT even after submission of documents and while waiting for approval, correct? In case there was a delay in the end of BIR in the processing? Let me repeat the question. Just to clarify, customer accounts will be subject to 12% VAT even after submission of documents and while waiting for approval, correct? In case there was a delay on the end of BIR in the processing? May I ask?
In the issue, it says that the effectivity of the VAT-Zero Rating will be on the date of the application. So even if the BIR incurred delays in their approval, so once the application is approved, the VAT-Zero Rating will be reckoned on the date of the application.
Thank you, Sir Jerry. So I'm afraid that's the last question that we can accommodate. Thank you, everyone. Thank you also to our panelists for joining us today. We hope that we were able to clarify and cover most, if not all, of your questions. So I understand there were other questions typed in the chat, but for questions that we were not able to address or for concerns that are account specific, you may contact your biz partner manager or corporate relationship manager for clarifications.
Thank you again to all of our business customers for joining us today. And with that, we officially conclude this afternoon's webinar. We hope to see you again in our future engagements. But before you go, we are sharing the QR code and the link to the feedback form. Please fill out this form to share with us your thoughts on how best you can gain more useful information and tips from Meralco. If you have further questions or concerns, we encourage you to contact your biz partner manager or corporate relationship manager so we can be of help.
That's right. And for corporate accounts, we also encourage you to join our exclusive Viber community for enterprise customers, wherein you can receive relevant updates regarding your business accounts. Just scan the QR code being flashed on the screen. Again, I'm Dane Rialuyo.
And I am Gian Zapata. Good afternoon and stay safe, everyone.